Join our Patreon.
Do you really want to know? We are Mythicist.
Dr. Price, Dave Allen says, "You know I'm very fond of Dr. Bob. Ask him, did he like my article? And tell him I find his particular historicist arguments very compelling. I find them more convincing than his mythicist arguments. Also tell him he has a big fan base of both historicist and mythicist, so to achieve that just shows how good he really is." And then he wanted to know about Eisler. Also ask him about Eisler. And he thinking the Egyptian was Simon Magus. Remember in Acts, Paul is confused with the Egyptian. So, with that being said, his article, his flattering concepts, and also Eisler and the Egyptian.
Well, the article in the Journal of Higher Criticism is, I asked him to write it, in fact, because he had written something similar in a long post on Facebook, where he said there's reason to believe that there was a version of Josephus, an original of Josephus's Testimonium, where he did attest the existence of Jesus, but didn't say he was the Messiah and all of that stuff. And it gets into the matter of what manuscripts are reflected in what manuscripts, because we don't have any remotely early enough to settle the question. Ours are all copies of copies because Christians, not Jews, continued to make copies because of the importance of Josephus in telling us about biblical and post-biblical Jewish history. And Dave thinks that he did mention Jesus in a non-pejorative way, and that this is reflected in some of the Arabic and Syriac, I think there are three of them, versions of the Testimonium passage, which read slightly differently. Richard Carrier holds the opposite view, that these other versions are simply quoting the Testimonium from the earliest known source that had it, namely Eusebius, that they weren't looking at some earlier manuscript version of Josephus, but were just getting it from Eusebius, which would be pretty natural given that Eusebius may have fabricated it. But I have to admit, I do not consider myself familiar enough with the textual critical history of Josephus to know what is probable and what is not. Carrier's not trying to refute Dave, but others who have made a similar sort of an argument. And I find myself still thinking that Eusebius created it. It fits so well with the context in which it appears in Eusebius in the preparation of the Gospel book, where it seems tailor-made to address points in question in this polemic that Eusebius is replying to, I guess, pagans about Jesus, and he's addressing various objections they make, one right after the other, in the Testimonium. Of course, he gives his own arguments too, but he quotes Josephus almost as a proof text. See, here's an unbiased source about Jesus, and look at what he said. I mean, it's not odd for us to say that Jesus was the Son of God, because look at what the Jew Josephus says. About this time came a wise man, if you can even call him a man, and so forth. In fact, that fits so well with the epistle of Abgarus, king of Edessa, that's also found only in Eusebius, and he probably, I mean, there's no question that is not an authentic work. If Eusebius didn't create it, somebody else did, and it wasn't Abgarus. But in that one, Abgarus says to Jesus, I hear that you heal people miraculously, from whence I infer you are either God or the Son of God. It sounds like the same sort of Christological axe grinding. So I'm not convinced by his argument, but then again, I have to say I am not an expert on the matter, so I still think that it's pretty well been refuted, but these things are always open, and I need to, like the synoptic problem, about which there's several theories, I really need to read much more on that, and I say that it just seems to me the idea that Mark and Q were the basis of both Matthew and Luke, it seems to work better as I study the Gospels. I'd say the same sort of thing about this, that tentatively I do definitely favor one particular theory, and that's that Eusebius created the Testimonium Flavianum, and but his argument is a competent one, and so in the Journal of Higher Criticism, I like to welcome a variety of theories and perspectives. Like in the issue I'm proofreading right now, Chris Hansen has an argument that mythicism really fails because I think the whole thing is kind of an ad hominem argument, but he says, look at the commitments the mythicists have had. They're all trying to debunk Christianity in one way or another, and they figured this ought to do the trick. Well, that, I say, just doesn't make any difference. It doesn't matter why they came to the conclusion they did. You just have to look at the evidence they brought forth and see if it seems cogent. I think it is. I don't care why they argue the way they did. But I was happy. I asked Chris to write because I knew he was a historicist, not a mythicist, but he's brilliant, and I wanted him to have his views aired there. Which brings me to my happiness that Dave is saying that he finds the historicist arguments I offer to be convincing, because I think they're plausible too. I think the balance of the evidence is on the other side, but I don't treat it as a dogma. So I'm glad I am not coming across as an axe grinder here and grinding the axe of the apostles, as Richard Tierney says. So I'm pleased to hear that, and really pleased to hear that there are people that like my work who are historicists. As my whole point is I want to be Socratic. I don't want to, well, maybe even more than Socrates, in the sense that you can always tell he's trying to guide people to a conclusion he already holds. My point is I want to be a midwife, as Socrates said. I want to help people. I want to facilitate their making their own synthesis and drawing their own conclusions about it. I could not care less if I convince people of mythicism or what. I just want to make available to anybody perspectives and information that may be new to them. And so, do with it what you will, let 100 flowers bloom.
That's funny you say that. I got a buddy of mine. I used to, when back in the day, watch you, I'd go, is he ever going to answer the question? Because ultimately, I wanted the answer, right? So if I ask you for an answer, if A and B are together, will it equal C? And you go on this trail, right, of explaining. And I'm like, okay. And then you're like, so, what do you think of that? And it's like, is it C? You know what I mean? Like, is the answer? What is the answer? And what you've done a lot of times is you did that exact thing. You create people to think. You might go, I think it's possible. And then this is a plausible explanation. But sometimes you don't give the answer, right? And I've learned to respect that because you're careful to say the answer is this, because you see so many plausible avenues And I guess when you've opened Pandora's box and realize how many streets lead to this place, you have to go, well, which street? If I said, which street's the right street, Dr. Price, and you go, there's 30 different streets. You know, what do you want me to tell you? You know, Elm Street? There's nightmare on that one, so I'm not trying to go there. You know, but it's I respect it today unlike I did before, and that's, I think, one of the reasons historicists appreciate your non-dogmatic conclusions on saying, Jesus could have, and if he did, we don't know too much about him, we can try and deduce, and look, some of the evidence we have might be more favorable, but we can't know that evidence is favorable. That's what I love about what you do. And to go into Dave Allen real quick, he just says, the Jesus movement wasn't organized, it was reactionary in his perspective. That's the difference between Jesus and the Egyptian or Judas the Galilean. So, you know, I'm conversating back, and he talks about how Celsus in 814 suggests Origen was reacting to Celsus, calling Jesus' movement a seditious movement. Eisler believes this came from an original testimony of Flavinium. Justin Martyr is fighting against him being called a sophist, also defending anti-Christian polemic. And then Tacitus may have used an original testimonium Flavinium in writing Annals 1544. If it had not been wiped clean, the testimonium Flavinium would have been the collaborating evidence, but as Price says, Jesus was sanitized, and this is also what happened in the testimonium Flavinium, he believes. It is true we cannot lean on any of the evidence, but that is because everything Jesus orientated was overwritten. Normally you would discount it, but the exception here is that nobody was trying to overwrite the Egyptian. Nobody was trying to overwrite Judas the Galilean. I believe all that has got to be taken into the account. So, hope you could track where you didn't hear my responses, but they're pretty much optimistic responses, just saying, look, we got to talk about this more. This is interesting. I'd love to hear how these possible potential theories make sense in their conclusions and stuff. But you could see that he's saying, why didn't they do this to the Egyptian? Why is this? These other guys get missed, but
why were they not whitewashed?
Right.
Well, who would have done it? I mean, their movements failed apparently. As far as I know, you didn't have any Theudas cult after he got killed. You did sort of have Judas of Galilee because the Zealots harked back to him, and that went on for quite some time. And they seemed to regard Judas of Galilee as another Judah Maccabee, and because they had a hereditary dynasty of people. Judas was the son of Hezekias, I guess you say it, who was an anti-Roman seditionist. Then after him, after Judas, was Menachem, who saw himself as the king of Israel. Josephus talks about him. He didn't last, and so there may not have been people to pick up the pieces. In fact, it's astonishing to read about how many messiahs have existed in Judaism and Islam and in Hinduism. I mean, you wouldn't really expect it there, but there are plenty in modern times. And when they would get killed, often their followers would say, well, it was really somebody else. The real Messiah is in hiding and he's going to come back and all that. And a lot of them just expired when nothing ever happened. Christianity didn't, but we don't want to get to J.P. Holding and the others and say, well, Christianity survived and prospered because of the Holy Ghost. It's miraculous. Richard Carrier wrote a thorough refutation of that Holding tries to make Christianity look as stupid and loathsome as he can, to say that nobody would have found this interesting or compelling. So the fact that it triumphed, it's God's providence. Get out of here. It's absurd. And we don't want to get close to that. I know Dave is not quite saying that, but to me it's uncomfortably close. If you're saying why, well, I would counter, given what Jesus would have been if Bart Ehrman and others are right, or even Brandon, why would Jesus have attracted such a following anyway? I mean, again, I think it's like, was there a historical Superman? Yeah, but he was only Clark Kent. And so it's not so much why did the others not fare as well, but why, if there was a historical Jesus, did Christianity prosper? And whereas it seems to me that if Jesus is a transformation of a long-known mythic savior, that same problem does not arise. You don't have to have a historical Osiris or Mithras to explain why those were widespread religions. It makes more sense if the hero was a myth. But I still, even if you look at it the way as I remember Dave does with the testimonium, it doesn't sound that whitewashed to me. It's sort of vacuous. It would be very hard to see why Jesus is even mentioned in the context in which he is, with Pilate and the revolutionary messiahs and so forth, unless he's saying that originally he was big stuff in that passage, but it's been shaved down and whittled away by Christians, not by Josephus. And I just don't really see evidence of that, but again, I'm no expert.
Join our Patreon.
We are Mythicians.